Welcome to Breaking Frontiers. Imagine this. You're talking to a guy and everything seems normal, but deep down you have a gut feeling that there's something more. His words may not reveal it, but his actions, they're screaming emotions he's too afraid to admit. Today we're uncovering 7 powerful signs that a man is secretly in love with you, but hiding it. Men by nature are often conditioned to suppress their emotions. From an early age, they receive implicit and explicit messages that emotional vulnerability is a weakness, something to be controlled, contained, or, in many cases, outright ignored. Society rewards stoicism in men, strength, decisiveness, control, but it rarely teaches them how to navigate the complexity of their inner emotional lives. This conditioning doesn't mean men don't feel deeply. On the contrary, many men experience emotions with an intensity that surprises even themselves, but they lack the framework to express those emotions without fear of appearing weak or vulnerable. This is why so many men, when confronted with love, admiration, or deep emotional attachment, retreat into a kind of psychological armor. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they don't know what to do with those feelings. They wrestle with them internally, rationalizing, analyzing, attempting to make sense of what is at its core an inherently irrational experience. Love is not logical. It does not fit neatly into the categories that the male psyche so often depends upon to maintain order. And so rather than risk disrupting the stability of their lives, men will often suppress, conceal, and even deny the depth of their emotions, sometimes even to themselves. At the root of this suppression is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of losing control. Love requires a surrender of the self, an acknowledgement that another person has power over one's emotional state. For many men, particularly those who have spent their lives striving for independence and self-sufficiency, this is a profoundly unsettling realization. To admit deep feelings is to make oneself vulnerable, and vulnerability is often misinterpreted as weakness, particularly in male social structures where status and control are highly valued. So instead of expressing their emotions openly, men will often resort to indirect expressions of affection through actions rather than words, through presence rather than declarations. A man who deeply cares but fears showing it will find himself drawn to the person he loves in ways he cannot fully explain. He will create excuses to be near them, offer assistance without being asked, remember the smallest details, and subtly prioritize their well-being. His words may be measured, reserved, but his behavior will often betray the depth of his emotion. There is also a psychological tension that arises when a man represses his feelings. When emotions are denied conscious expression, they do not simply disappear. Instead, they manifest in other ways, sometimes through uncharacteristic irritability, sometimes through intense focus on seemingly unrelated tasks, sometimes through acts of protectiveness that seem excessive given the situation. A man hiding his feelings may seem indifferent on the surface, but underneath, his mind is engaged in an ongoing battle between what he feels and what he believes he is allowed to express. This is where subconscious behavior becomes a critical indicator. A man who suppresses his emotions often gives himself away through involuntary cues. Prolonged eye contact, a subtle shift in body language, a momentary lapse in his otherwise controlled demeanor. These are the moments where the truth of his feelings surfaces, even when he is trying to conceal it. The subconscious cannot lie indefinitely. No matter how much a man tells himself that he is in control of his emotions, the reality is that emotions, especially love, will find a way to reveal themselves. But even when these emotions become evident, many men still hesitate to acknowledge them. The reason is that love is not just about attraction or affection. It is about responsibility. A man who admits his feelings is, in a way, accepting an emotional duty, one that he may not feel ready for, one that he may not trust himself to handle correctly. Love demands honesty, presence, and, above all, a willingness to be seen, flaws and all. That is an intimidating prospect, especially for men who have been conditioned to believe that their value is tied to their ability to remain strong and unshaken. What often happens then is that men engage in a kind of emotional push and pull. One moment they might exhibit clear signs of affection, and the next they retreat, creating emotional distance. This is not necessarily a sign of disinterest, but rather a sign of internal conflict. They are testing the waters, assessing the risks, trying to determine whether their emotions are safe to reveal. It is not manipulation, it is self-preservation, a deep-seated instinct to protect themselves from pain, embarrassment, or loss of control. Understanding this dynamic is crucial, not only for those trying to decipher a man's hidden emotions, but for men themselves. The suppression of feelings does not make those feelings disappear. It only delays their expression, sometimes leading to regret, missed opportunities, and unnecessary emotional suffering. The real challenge is learning to reconcile the fear of vulnerability with the undeniable reality of human connection. Because in the end, to love is to risk, and to risk is to truly live. Human beings are not as good at deception as they like to believe. We tell ourselves stories about who we are, what we feel, and how we wish to be perceived, but the body always tells the truth. It operates on a level deeper than conscious thought, responding to emotions in ways that are almost impossible to control. This is particularly true when it comes to suppressed feelings. A man who is hiding deep emotions will often betray himself, not with words, which he can measure and manipulate, but through involuntary movements, subtle shifts in behavior, and subconscious reactions that reveal far more than he intends. One of the most telling signs is body orientation. When a man feels deeply for someone but is trying to suppress it, his body fights against his mind. He may insist, even to himself, that his feelings are under control, that they are insignificant, but if you watch closely, his body tells a different story. He will angle himself toward you, even in a crowded room, drawn to your presence without realizing it. He may find himself leaning in when you speak, mirroring your gestures unconsciously, positioning himself closer than necessary. These are not the actions of someone indifferent. They are the instincts of a person whose emotions are reaching out, even as his mind tries to hold them back. Eye contact is another critical indicator. The eyes are deeply connected to the emotional centers of the brain. They respond instinctively, making it nearly impossible to mask true feelings. A man concealing his emotions will often struggle with eye contact in two opposite ways. Either he will hold it too long, as if trying to silently communicate what he cannot say, or he will avoid it entirely, looking away the moment the connection feels too intense. The eyes are windows, and when someone is experiencing emotions they cannot fully process or admit, they either try to communicate through them or shield themselves from being seen too clearly. Nervous habits often emerge as well. A man who is suppressing strong emotions may fidget in your presence, adjusting his sleeves, running a hand through his hair, touching his face, or shifting his weight unnecessarily. This restlessness is a physical manifestation of inner turmoil. His body is responding to an unspoken tension, the conflict between what he wants to express and what he believes he should suppress. These behaviors often appear in moments of emotional significance, particularly when the conversation becomes personal or when he feels an unexpected wave of attraction or attachment. The voice can also reveal suppressed emotions. A man's voice may subtly change when speaking to someone he cares for. It might drop slightly in tone, slow down, or soften, almost as if his subconscious is lowering a defensive barrier. On the other hand, he might become more abrupt, his speech more controlled, especially if he is trying to push down emotions that feel overwhelming. Changes in vocal patterns, particularly ones that seem inconsistent with his usual demeanor, are often a subconscious attempt to manage emotions that are too powerful to be ignored. Another revealing behavior is protective instincts. When a man deeply cares for someone, even if he refuses to acknowledge it outright, his natural inclination is to ensure their well-being. This doesn't necessarily mean grand, dramatic gestures. It can be as simple as walking on the outer side of the sidewalk to shield you from traffic, subtly placing a hand on your back in a crowded space to guide you through, or instinctively checking in when he knows you've had a difficult day. These are not just habits, they are subconscious expressions of emotional attachment. Even when a man insists his feelings are neutral, his actions suggest otherwise. There is also the matter of selective attention. The human brain prioritizes what it finds important. If a man is concealing deep feelings, his focus will still betray him. He will notice things about you that others overlook. Small changes in your mood, slight variations in your appearance, the things that make you happy or frustrated. Even if he downplays his attentiveness, it is nearly impossible to be so consistently aware of someone without some level of emotional investment. His mind is tuned to you in ways he may not fully understand himself. One of the most paradoxical behaviors is the oscillation between closeness and distance. A man who is struggling with his emotions might alternate between moments of deep connection and moments of withdrawal. One day he may be particularly engaged, leaning into conversations, seeking excuses to be near you. The next he may seem distant, detached, almost indifferent. This fluctuation is not random. It is the result of an internal struggle. When he allows himself to feel too much, he instinctively pulls away to regain control. When he suppresses those emotions too effectively, they build up until they push him back toward you. The key to understanding hidden emotions is recognizing that suppression is not the same as absence. Men who hide their feelings do so for reasons that are often deeply personal. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of disrupting the status quo. But emotions, especially strong ones, do not simply disappear because they are denied. They leak through in unexpected ways, revealing themselves in the small, unconscious details of everyday interaction. Those who pay attention will always see the truth long before it is spoken aloud. When a man remembers details about you that even you barely recall mentioning, it's not coincidence, and it's certainly not accidental. It's an unconscious prioritization, a sign that his mind has elevated you to a level of significance that goes beyond casual acquaintance. The brain filters out the vast majority of information it encounters daily, retaining only what it deems valuable or emotionally relevant. So when a man remembers the little things, your favorite book, how you take your coffee, the name of your childhood pet, it is because in some corner of his mind, he has placed you in a category that demands attention. This isn't about memory. It's about meaning. This kind of selective retention is deeply tied to emotional investment. When someone truly cares, their brain instinctively catalogs details that seem insignificant to others. It's not something they consciously decide to do, rather, it's a byproduct of their attachment. They may not even be aware that they are doing it. If you ask them why they remember that you once mentioned offhandedly that you love thunderstorms or that you prefer quiet bookstores over crowded cafes, they probably wouldn't have an answer. But the reason is simple. You matter to them in a way that compels their subconscious to hold on to pieces of you. Beyond mere recollection, there's another layer to this: application. A man who remembers details about you doesn't just store them away like facts in a database. He uses them in ways that show consideration. He'll bring you your favorite tea when you're having a rough day, send you a song that aligns perfectly with something you once mentioned enjoying, or reference a personal anecdote you shared weeks ago, not because he planned to, but because it surfaced naturally in his mind. This is how care manifests in those who struggle to express it openly. It's not about grand declarations or poetic speeches. It's in the quiet, consistent ways he shows he listens. There is an element of psychology at play here. People invest in what they want to maintain, and attention is one of the clearest indicators of value. If someone is indifferent, they won't expend mental energy tracking minor details. They won't notice the slight hesitation in your voice when you say, "You're fine," but really aren't. They won't remember that you have an important event coming up unless it directly involves them. But a man who holds deep feelings, whether he acknowledges them or not, will keep track of these things. His emotional attachment overrides indifference. What makes this especially telling is that men, generally speaking, are not socialized to be detail-oriented in interpersonal relationships. While women are often encouraged to observe nuances in conversation and interaction, men are typically conditioned to focus on broader patterns and overarching structures. So when a man is attentive to details in a relationship, when he consistently remembers the subtle things that bring you joy or frustration, it is not a passive habit. It is an indication that his feelings for you have crossed into a territory where his mind is making unconscious adjustments, prioritizing your presence in a way that goes against his usual behavioral patterns. There's also the contrast to consider. A man who is merely polite or casually interested might remember basic things: your job, where you're from, maybe a couple of things about your hobbies if they're particularly distinctive. But a man who is emotionally invested remembers details that even you wouldn't expect anyone to recall. He notices the books you always pick up but never buy. He picks up on the phrases you use most often. He remembers the way your mood shifts when you talk about certain topics, even if you never explicitly say how they make you feel. This is because his perception of you is deeper than surface-level attraction. It is rooted in a genuine emotional connection. This depth of memory and consideration is also why men who suppress their emotions can become so conflicted. They may convince themselves that they are in control, that their feelings are manageable, that they can keep things casual, but then they catch themselves instinctively remembering something small and meaningful, something that should be insignificant but isn't. That's when they start to realize that what they feel is not just passing interest. It is something more profound, something embedded in the way they perceive and engage with the world around them. When a man remembers the little things, he is telling you, whether he admits it or not, that you are significant to him, not just in the moment, not just as an afterthought, but in a way that has woven you into the very framework of his attention. Jealousy is one of the most complex and revealing human emotions. It is not just a reaction to the fear of loss, it is a signal of value. People do not become jealous over things that mean nothing to them. A man who suppresses his feelings for you may not openly express jealousy, but that does not mean it does not exist. Instead, it seeps into his actions, into the way he reacts when you mention another man, into the slight shift in his energy when he senses competition, into the moments where he becomes distant, irritated, or strangely competitive without explanation. These are not random behaviors. They are the manifestations of an internal struggle, one where his emotions betray the control he is desperately trying to maintain. A man who harbors deep but hidden feelings is often caught between two conflicting forces. On one hand, he has trained himself to suppress his emotions, either because he is afraid of vulnerability or because he believes the timing is not right. On the other hand, human attachment is not something that can be indefinitely ignored. When he sees you interacting with another man, especially one who is clearly interested in you, his instincts respond before his logic can suppress them. This is not necessarily an aggressive jealousy. It is often subtle, masked as disinterest, rationalized as something else. He might change the subject quickly, avoid eye contact, or become unusually sarcastic. He might withdraw, emotionally distancing himself as a way to protect himself from feelings he refuses to acknowledge, or paradoxically, he might become more engaged, attempting to assert his presence in ways that are slightly more intense than usual. Jealousy in this context is not always about possessiveness, it is about realization. A man who has been suppressing his emotions often uses competition as a mirror. When he sees another man taking an interest in you, it forces him to confront what he has been avoiding, his own attachment to you. He may not even be aware of how deep his feelings go until he sees them threatened. This is why jealousy, when understood properly, is not just about insecurity. It is about clarity. It reveals what the mind has tried to keep hidden. This is also why jealousy manifests differently in men who are suppressing their emotions. Instead of direct confrontation, they might respond in ways that seem out of character. Some become overly logical, trying to convince themselves and those around them that they have no reason to care. They might make dismissive comments like, "Oh, he seems like a great guy for you," in a tone that feels just a little too forced. Others might take the opposite approach, subtly undermining the other man in small ways, making quiet remarks that cast doubt on his intentions or abilities. It is not always intentional. It is a subconscious attempt to reassert some level of control over a situation that feels increasingly unstable. Then there is the physical response. When a man feels jealousy, even if he refuses to acknowledge it, his body will react. You might notice a slight tension in his posture, his jaw tightening momentarily, his hand forming a fist without him realizing it. He may glance away quickly as if disengaging, but then steal small, quick looks to assess the situation. The body does not lie. It reacts faster than the mind can filter it. If you pay attention, you will see the truth long before he is willing to speak it. There is also a defensive aspect to this kind of jealousy. A man who suppresses his emotions often convinces himself that he is indifferent, that he is unaffected. But when jealousy arises, he is forced to confront the possibility that he is far more invested than he thought. Some men respond to this by withdrawing further, creating distance to avoid acknowledging what they feel. Others lean into competition, trying to outperform or outshine the perceived rival. It is not necessarily conscious, it is instinctual, a way of proving to themselves that they still have control over their emotions. Understanding this kind of jealousy requires recognizing it for what it is, not just a reaction to a perceived threat, but an unspoken confession. It is one of the few emotions strong enough to override even the most disciplined attempts at suppression. If a man is showing signs of jealousy, even in subtle ways, it means something. It means he has already formed an attachment. It means he sees you as more than just another person in his life. Even if he refuses to say it, even if he rationalizes it away, his reactions have already spoken the truth. Now that you know these signs, the question is, what will you do next? If you see these behaviors in someone, don't rush him to confess. Instead, create a safe space for honesty and connection, because when the time is right, the truth will always find its way to the surface. If you found this helpful, share it with someone who might need it. And remember, love is often hidden in the little things. You just have to know where to look.